Wyoming Territory, late spring, 1874. The smoke was long gone, but the smell still hung in the air, a bitter, heavy thing that clung to the scorched earth like sorrow. Marshal Tannen reined his horse to a stop when he saw her. A woman down on her knees, fingers black with soot, digging through the ashes of a burned-down cabin like she could turn back time if she just clawed deep enough. He dismounted slowly. "Madam," she did not look up. Her skirts were torn at the hem, brown hair knotted back with a strip of cloth, her hands moving fast over charred wood and broken stone. He stepped closer. "You want to start over?" he asked, voice low but steady. "I will help you build it." She froze. Her shoulders trembled, but she did not cry. "Not then. I do not know your name," she said without turning. "Malden Tannen," he said. "Marshal out of Red Hollow." She finally looked at him, eyes red from smoke and grief but sharp with something else, steel maybe. "Keziah Hartley," she said. "This was my home." Malden glanced around. The cabin had been small but sturdy. Now it was nothing but black wood and rubble. "What happened?" "Fire," she said. "2 nights ago, after sundown." Malden nodded. "You got anyone nearby?" Her lips pressed tight. "No, my husband died last fall." "Fever." She hesitated, then added, "My boys are gone." "Gone?" She stood slowly, brushing ash from her skirt. "I left them with a neighbor while I went to town for salt and flour. I came back and this." The neighbor said they ran off after the fire started, scared. "No one has seen them since." Malden looked at the ground a long moment. "Names? Caleb is 6, Cooper is 4. That was all it took." Malden turned toward his horse. "Where were they last seen?" "Along the creek north of here." "Maybe 2 miles. Do you have a horse?" "It died in the fire." He nodded once. "Get on mine, I will walk." Keziah stared at him. "You do not know me." "I do not have to. 2 boys out there alone and you standing in ashes." "That is enough." She hesitated, then climbed onto the horse, hands trembling on the reins. Malden walked beside her as they followed the creek north, the late spring sun dipping low on the horizon. They found the boys just before dusk. Caleb stood in front of his little brother like a soldier guarding a post. His face was smeared with dirt, and his eyes were wide when he saw them. Cooper clung to his older brother's arm, crying softly. "Ma," Caleb said. Keziah slid down from the horse and ran to them both, gathering them into her arms. She cried then, gasping sobs into their hair as she held them close. Malden turned away to give them a moment. When she finally looked up, her face was streaked with tears and soot. "Thank you," she whispered. Malden tipped his hat. "You are welcome." "We do not have anything now," she said, her voice hoarse. "No home, no horse, no food." "You have your boys," Malden said. "And I meant what I said. If you want to start over, I will help." She looked at him a long while. "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything." They walked back together, the boys riding the horse while Keziah and Malden walked side by side. As night fell, they camped near the edge of the burned land. Malden built a fire while Keziah wrapped the boys in blankets and held them close. Later, when the boys had fallen asleep, she sat across the fire from him. "What did you lose?" she asked. "My wife," he said simply. 3 years ago, diphtheria came through Red Hollow, took her and our baby girl." Keziah's eyes softened. "I am sorry," he nodded. "I could not save them." She stared into the fire. "I thought I would be stronger, but when I saw the cabin," her voice cracked, "I felt like I had died too." "You did not," he said gently. "You are still here." She looked up at him. "And what about you, Malden Tannen? You still alive in there?" His gaze held hers. "More than I was yesterday." Neither of them spoke for a while. The fire popped. The boys stirred in their sleep, then settled again. Finally, Keziah said, "I do not want charity." "It is not charity," he said. "It is a hand you can hold while you stand back up." She nodded slowly. Then yes, I want to start over. He looked at her, her face lit by firelight, and said quietly, "Then I will help you build it." That night they slept near one another under the stars, the boys tucked between them. The quiet of the plains wrapped around them like a blanket, and for the first time in days, Keziah closed her eyes and did not dream of fire. In the morning, Malden started cutting wood. The first board went up before the sun reached its peak. Malden set it against the newly dug posts, hands sure despite the deep calluses and lingering ache in his right shoulder, earned years back from a fall off a green horse. Keziah stood a few feet away, holding a bundle of dry grass for kindling. Caleb and Cooper picked their way through the meadow behind her, searching for straight sticks to use as pretend rifles, their voices hushed, like they were still unsure the land would let them laugh. Malden adjusted the plank. "You any good with a hammer?" Keziah stepped forward and took the tool from his hand. "Better with a saw." He watched her drive the nail in clean. "That's so. I built the chicken coop myself," she said, "and the root cellar door. My husband was better with crops than tools." Malden nodded once. "Then we'll make a good pair. I'm better with tools than crops." She handed the hammer back. "We'll see about that." They worked quietly after that. The new cabin would be smaller than the last, at least for now. Enough space to keep out the wind and hold a fire steady. Malden had salvaged what he could from the old foundation, but most of it had cracked or burned too deep. They started fresh, half a dozen yards from the ruins. The boys helped where they could, mostly fetching nails or holding boards steady, but they kept close to their mother's side. Malden didn't ask them questions. They'd speak when they were ready. By dusk, 2 walls stood upright. Malden stirred beans over the fire while Keziah stitched a tear in Cooper's sleeve. Caleb leaned against her knee, half asleep, while Cooper let his head rest on her arm. Malden watched them from across the fire, one hand slowly turning the spoon, his thoughts quieter than usual. "You always work alone?" Keziah asked without looking up. He tapped the spoon against the pot. "I ride circuit between Red Hollow and the old mining towns west of here. There's not much law out this way." "Then why stay?" "Because there's even less decency without someone willing to go slow and look folks in the eye." She tied off the thread and bit the end clean. "You're not what I expected." "What you expect? A man who'd drop the boys and me off at the nearest town and ride on. And you'd have stayed." "I'd have had no choice." Malden leaned back on his elbows, the firelight catching the edge of his jaw. "You have won now." She met his gaze across the flames. "And what do I owe for that?" "Nothing," he said. "But if you want to pay it forward, you can hand me the bread from your satchel." She passed it to him, lips twitching. "I thought you didn't take charity." "I don't," he said, tearing off a piece. "This is a favor. I'm saving you the trouble of carrying it." For the first time since they'd met, she laughed, not loud but real. It sat soft between them, like a new leaf opening in spring. The boys fell asleep curled together, boot tips touching. Keziah tucked a blanket over them and stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. Malden added another log to the fire, then looked up when she stepped beside him. "Tomorrow," she said, "we can raise the roof frame." He nodded. "I'll bring the rafters down from the pine grove. You trust me to measure it right. I trust you to tell me if I don't." He paused, then added, "You've got a steady way about you." She looked down at the fire, then out into the dark. "I used to feel strong. You still are." She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not sure I believe that yet." "You will," he said. "One day without even noticing." She glanced at him and for the first time didn't look away too quickly. "You always talk like that." "Only when it's worth saying," he said. She smiled, faint and fleeting, but it stayed in her eyes. "Then I'll try to listen." They sat beside each other in the hush of the prairie, the fire crackling low, the scent of pine smoke rising into the stars. Neither of them spoke again that night. They didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. The roof frame took shape by midday, a lattice of rough pine beams that caught the sun like ribs of a ship turned skyward. Malden steadied the crossbar while Keziah drove the wooden peg through the joint, her arms straining with the effort. Sweat darkened the back of her blouse, and sawdust clung to her forearms in pale streaks. "You've got a clean hand with wood," Malden said, holding the beam steady. "Came from a line of Coopers," she said between breaths. "My father built barrels, said if a stave didn't fit right, it'd split under pressure." He gave a slight nod. "Seems a useful lesson. I didn't realize how much until I had to make a life hold water." They lowered the beam into place. Malden tightened the hemp cord binding the joints, then stepped back to check the line of the roof. It sat straight against the sky, clean and strong. Behind him, the boys sat beneath a cottonwood, threading wildflowers through a loop of wire Caleb had scavenged from the edge of the field. "You ever think of leaving Wyoming?" Keziah asked, brushing her hands against her apron. "Once," he said. "Before the war, I thought I'd end up in Missouri. My brother had a dry goods store there, seemed like a quiet life." "You never went," he shook his head. "Came back from Tennessee with a bullet above the hip and a head full of things I'd rather not keep company with. Couldn't sit behind a counter after that." Keziah didn't speak for a moment. A breeze moved through the golden grass, bending the stalks in slow waves. "I tried to leave once," she said. "After my second boy was born, my husband had taken to drink by then. There were nights he'd forget their names. I packed a bag, wrapped both boys in blankets, and walked to the road." "What stopped you?" "A neighbor saw me. Told me I'd never make it to Cheyenne without a wagon. Said the plains would take my children before the town ever could." Malden met her eyes. "And now?" "I buried my husband with the last winter snow," she said. "And now I'm still standing." He didn't offer sympathy. She hadn't asked for it. Instead, he said, "You've got grit, and that's rarer than most things." The boys came running, then Caleb with the flower crown high above his head, Cooper trailing behind, grinning. "For you, Ma," Caleb said, presenting the tangled wreath like a gift fit for royalty. Keziah knelt to take it, her expression softening. "You made this," Cooper nodded shy. "Caleb said it'd keep the sun off your eyes." She laughed, a quiet one, and set it gently on her head. "Then I reckon I'll wear it every day." Malden crouched to check one of Cooper's boots, the sole beginning to separate. "We'll need to patch these soon. Leather's thinning." "I can mend them," Keziah said, standing. "I've got a strip of harness back in the satchel." Malden straightened. "Tomorrow I'll ride into Red Hollow. Bring back flour, nails, and a bit of honey if the store's got any left." "Take Caleb with you," she said, glancing toward her son. "He needs to see more than smoke and ash." Malden looked to the boy. "You up for a ride?" Caleb's eyes lit, and he gave a solemn nod. "I'll carry the list." They made camp near the cabin frame that evening, the scent of fresh cut pine mingling with the smoke from their cook fire. Keziah boiled cornmeal into cakes while Malden stitched a tear in his coat's lining. The boys, worn out from the day, fell asleep before the stars had fully emerged. Keziah sat cross-legged across from him, slipping her needle through a scrap of muslin. "You always repair your own clothes. I don't much like other folks poking through my pockets." She smiled faintly. "What do you keep in them? Secrets?" "Mostly lint and a bit of tobacco, but I like to keep my pride intact." She set her sewing aside and reached for the kettle. Coffee's boiled through. Malden took the tin cup she handed him. "You always this quiet once the sun goes down?" "I used to fill the evenings with stories, for the boys, then I stopped." "Why?" "They started asking when their father would come home." Malden sipped. "You tell them the truth, eventually. They still dream different, he nodded once. Dreams don't answer to truth. She looked toward the sleeping boys. No, but I hope they make room for it someday. They sat in silence for a long stretch. The moon rose, pale and full, casting silver across the unfinished frame of the house. Maldon leaned back on his elbows, eyes half-lidded, the firelight flickering across his boots. "You ever think about building more than a cabin?" Keziah asked, her voice low. He didn't answer right away. "Then, I think about what's worth building with." She turned her face toward him, firelight catching the curve of her cheek. "And how do you know when you've found it?" He met her gaze. "When it keeps showing up. Every morning, even when it's tired. Even when it's afraid." Keziah looked down at her hands, calloused and still smudged with dirt. "Then maybe we're both worth more than we thought." He didn't deny it. He didn't need to. The quiet between them said enough. Maldon rode back into the clearing late the next evening, the pack-horse trailing behind, its saddlebags heavy with flour, lard, and a coil of wire he'd bargained from a blacksmith whose jaw still bore the marks of a recent fistfight. Caleb rode in front of him, arms wrapped tight around the saddle horn, cheeks flushed from wind and the weight of a full day's ride. Keziah stepped out from the half-framed doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was streaked with clay, a smear above her brow where she'd brushed sweat away while tamping the new hearthstone into place. She walked down the slope toward them, slow and even. "Bring back the whole town?" she asked, eyeing the bulging saddlebags. "Just the parts worth having," Maldon said, easing to the ground. Caleb slid off a beat behind him, eyes bright. "Ma, I saw a man shoeing a mule with only 3 legs. Said the 4th one gave out in a snowstorm and he carved the stump flat so it wouldn't split." Keziah ran her hand over his hair, smoothing the wind-tossed strands. "You see any boys with more sense than stories?" "No," Caleb said, grinning. "But I saw a man with a beard down to his belt who said he used to mine in Virginia City and slept beside a rattler for 3 nights before he noticed." Keziah raised an eyebrow. And did Marshall Tannen believe him? Maldon was untying a bundle of oilskin. "I believed his beard." He handed her a wrapped tin. She opened it, revealing thick cuts of smoked pork fatback and a wedge of cheddar starting to sweat in the heat. "Where'd you find this?" she asked. "Traded my last silver button and a lie about needing it for wedding supper," he said. She didn't flinch. "And whose wedding did you name?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "Didn't name one." She turned toward the cabin frame, shoulders straight. "Boys helped me hang the door hinges." Maldon glanced at the rough pine slab hanging level in its frame. "That's so. They argued for an hour about which way it should open. Cooper said it ought to swing toward the sun." Maldon looked to the boy, now tilting his head skyward as if to measure it. He might be onto something. That night, they ate by lantern light, seated on stumps around a plank laid across 2 crates. Keziah sliced the cheese thin, rationing it like a banker would coin. Maldon poured water from the tin kettle, and Caleb traced patterns in the dirt with a stick until he nodded off in the middle of a drawing. Cooper leaned against Keziah's hip, half asleep himself, thumb tucked under his chin. Maldon set his cup down. "You ever think about keeping chickens again?" She looked up slowly. "I thought I might raise goats instead. Less feed, more milk. You'd need fencing. I've got eyes on the split rails east of the grove. Storm last year knocked them loose. No one's claimed them." Maldon shifted forward. "I can help haul them. 2 days' work, maybe 3, she hesitated. "And what would you ask in return?" "Nothing," he said, quiet. "But I'd take a place to sit come evening." Keziah studied him, her face unreadable for a long moment. "The boys like you. I'm not trying to win them. They still do." Cooper stirred, curling close to her side. She brushed his hair behind his ear, slow and absent. "You plan on leaving?" she asked. "No," he said. "Not unless I'm made to. And if I asked," her voice was steady but her hands stilled, "I'd ask why," he said. She looked out toward the starlit frame of the unfinished roof. "Because sometimes it's harder to trust what stays." Malden leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. "I don't expect you to trust me yet." "Then what do you expect?" He met her eyes. "That you'll let me keep showing up." Keziah said nothing for a long time. Then she reached behind her and pulled a folded piece of muslin from the crate. She passed it across the table. Inside was a square of patched canvas stitched careful, seams flat and even. A shirt pocket. "I mended it," she said. "From the coat in your bedroll." Malden unfolded it slowly. "Didn't ask you to. You didn't have to." He looked at her a moment longer, then folded it back into the cloth and tucked it into his satchel. "I'll wear it when the roof's done." They sat in the quiet after that, firelight casting long shadows across the table. The boys slept, the wind shifted, and the sounds of the prairie settled around them. Malden didn't press her. Keziah didn't pull away, and when the lantern burned low, she didn't ask him to leave. The roof held through its first night of rain. It had come just before dawn, thin, steady drops that whispered through the cottonwoods and tapped along the new shingles like a promise. Malden stood beneath the eave, arms crossed, watching the water bead and roll from the angled boards. Inside, the hearthstone was dry, the boys tucked into their bedrolls near the wall, soft breaths rising and falling with sleep. Keziah was already up, sleeves rolled, a small iron pan warming oats over the coals. She glanced at him without a word, then nodded toward the basin. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and knelt to wash the morning from his hands. "I found a patch of wild mint near the east fence line," she said. "Boiled some with the oats. Might help the taste." He dried his hands on the cloth she handed him. "I've eaten worse." "I know," she said. "I've seen you chew jerky like it owed you money." Malden smiled faintly and leaned down to check the edge of the hearthstone, where the clay had dried firm around the base. "Held better than I thought it would." "I mixed crushed limestone into the mud," she said. "My mother taught me, said it binds tighter like bone." He looked up at her. "You speak of her often, not aloud," she said, quiet, "but she's in the work. In the way I fold the corners of a quilt or boil a poultice. She died before Cooper could walk." Malden reached for one of the tin bowls. "What was her name?" "Ruth." She ladled the oats in. "She carried herself like she carried water, steady and full to the brim." He accepted the bowl. "Then she raised you right." Keziah turned toward the window, where the rain had begun to slow. "I think she'd have liked it here. Then I'm glad we built it where we did." The boys woke slowly, Caleb stretching first, then nudging Cooper until he groaned and burrowed deeper into the blanket. Keziah handed them bowls, then stepped outside with Malden as they ate. The scent of wet earth hung around them. A low bank of cloud hovered over the hills, but the light behind it was warming, promising more than gray. "I got a letter from Red Hollow," Malden said, pulling a folded envelope from his coat. "Sheriff says they've found someone to cover the northern route. Says I can stay out here permanent if I want the badge local." Keziah turned toward him but said nothing. "I told him I'd take it," Malden said, "so long as I had a place to hang my coat." She looked out across the field where the split rails still lay in a pile, waiting to be shaped into a pen. "I'd like to raise goats," she said. "You said that. I'd need help." He stepped closer. "Then I'll help." Keziah turned to face him fully. "And what would you ask in return this time?" Malden's voice was low. "A place at your table. A hand to hold when the days are long and the nights are longer. Someone to build the rest of this life with." She didn't answer right away. The rain had stopped, and the wind had picked up just enough to lift the edge of her apron. "I've lost too much to promise things lightly." "I'm not asking for promises," he said. "Just the chance to earn them one day at a time." Her eyes didn't leave his. "I want more than steady hands and kind words." "You'll have more," he said. "You'll have all of me." Keziah reached out and placed her hand over his. It was worn from tools and weather, but it closed around hers like it was made to. "I don't want to wonder if you'll leave come winter." "I won't," he said. "Not ever." She nodded once, then leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, not with urgency, but with certainty. It was a quiet kiss, a binding one, the kind that didn't need to be explained. Behind them, Caleb's voice rang out. "Ma, Cooper put oats in my boots." "Then he'll be the one to clean them," she called back, not turning. Malden chuckled, forehead resting against hers. "That's going to be a regular thing, isn't it?" "Every day," she said. "You still sure?" He kissed her again. "I've never been more." They spent the afternoon clearing the fence line. Caleb helped carry the split rails, while Cooper followed behind with a bundle of twine and a stick he called his measuring sword. By sundown, the first corner post stood firm, the pen beginning to take shape. That night, Keziah brought out the quilt she'd kept folded since the fire. It was singed in one corner, but the rest held deep blues and worn reds sewn tight in even rows. Malden helped her spread it across the new bed frame. The cabin smelled of pine and earth, of smoke and bread, and the faint trace of mint. The boys slept close, their breathing steady. Keziah sat on the edge of the bed, watching him as he hung his coat by the door. She reached for his hand. "You're home now." Malden sat beside her, fingers laced through hers. "So are you." They lay beneath the patchwork quilt, not speaking, not needing to. A life was unfolding between them, not loudly, but with purpose. Like a beam raised straight, or a root cellar door hung square, or a promise made in the hush between rain and sun. Years passed, and winters came. The goats arrived that fall 2 does and a stubborn buck. The fence held. Caleb grew tall, Cooper clever. The cabin gained a second room, a porch, a root cellar lined with shelves she kept full. Malden wore the badge on Sundays, and the boys called him Pa before the first snow settled on the ridge. Sometimes, when the wind shifted through the cottonwoods and the fire burned low, Keziah would reach across the table and take his hand, just to feel it there. And each time, Malden would hold it like it was the only thing that ever fit just right.